Now, I found the example given in the text of the author when he was in high school and he auditioned for a play, and then he's sitting in the auditorium waiting to hear if he gets a part or not, and they call out his name. And he can hear the girl in front of him say, "Who's that?" Because she had no idea who he was. Thought that was kind of funny. Must have been a little bit embarrassing as well. But I understand what he means about him wondering the same thing at that point as a teenager. It might sound a little bit hokey or wishy washy, but he really was wondering who he was as a person. And I don't know how old you are, but I remember as a teenager having these same general thoughts. Not in as clear and well defined a manner, but being insecure about who I was as a person, trying to feel good about myself, all those things. When we talk about socialization and developing a sense of self, a set of ideas and attitudes about who we are, and specifically who we are as an independent being, we usually focus on this period of our lives called adolescence, when you're transitioning from a child into an adult, because there seems to be so much development going on at that stage of life. So, adolescence is also roughly the teen years, roughly about 12 or 13, although it can extend beyond 19, it can extend into the early 20s. In reality, however, your sense of self continues to change and develop and evolve, sometimes in positive ways and sometimes in negative ways, or anywhere in between on that spectrum, throughout your entire life. Socialization is a lifelong process. It begins the second you're born and doesn't end until the second you die. And I think that in general, because there's so much focus on the teenage years, we forget that this happens throughout our life. Having said that, childhood socialization is, as I already mentioned, of particular importance. And when you look at how we, as these wrinkly little infants, are able to develop a sense of self or a self image, you can accurately say we're really looking at how each person becomes a person in the full sense of the word. The first person I'm going to talk about in this regard is Sigmund Freud, who was not a sociologist, but he's included in this discussion because he did look at how a person's sense of self emerges, how it develops, how it evolves. And what Freud did was he looked at infants and how they try to interact with the world around them, how infants try to interact and communicate with the people around them. And he saw that infants cry because they're hungry or they need their diaper changed or for some other reason. And when they do this, they want or need something done immediately. He saw that infants have no patience, that they don't want to wait, that they want instant gratification. This was not a new observation, but what Freud focused on was how this need for instant gratification affects your sense of self when it is denied. And if you have a child yourself, or if you've spent any amount of time with an infant, you'll understand exactly what he's talking about. The specific example in the textbook refers to when parents are trying, usually desperately trying, to get their infants to sleep through the night. And I remember this. One night I actually began to fall asleep standing up, leaning against my son's crib, because I was so tired and he was still wide awake. When a parent is first commonly starting what is known as sleep training with a baby, usually the baby is not very happy about it. And I mean, think about what must be going through their little mind. You always come to me when I cry. Where are you? Get in here, get in here. They're not happy, and they let you know that by crying. But eventually, with consistency and patience, a baby will begin to eat more in their last feeding before going down for the night, even if for them the night only means sleeping 5 or 6 hours straight. And this helps them sleep for a longer period of time. So on some level, the infant begins to grasp the idea. They begin to realize that their parents are not coming into their room to get them. So if they wake up a bit, they have to go back to sleep on their own. That they need to learn how to self-soothe. And Freud saw this. And he saw this as the beginning of an infant realizing that they are an independent person, their own person, that they are separate from other people, and that they have their own existence. With this realization, he saw that infants learn their first lessons of self-control. Their first lessons, however rudimentary they may be, in learning what is right or wrong behavior. And as an extension of this, he saw this as the beginning of a baby developing a conscience. Now, Freud also takes his perspective further, distinguishing between the id, the superego, and the ego, so make sure you have a clear understanding of these from the textbook. Charles Horton Cooley is a sociologist. He was an American and he taught at the University of Michigan. And he argued that a self is social, that your sense of self emerges through interaction with important people around you, and then throughout your life it continues to develop and evolve and be modified and changed. So you can't develop a sense of self unless you interact with other people in some way, which means that the only way to not develop a sense of self is to have no interaction with other people. And what Cooley said was that part of developing a sense of self through socialization is that you come to see others as others see you, at least in part. So what we think other people think of us will have an effect on our sense of self. If you think other people view you as attractive, that will affect how you feel about yourself. If you think that other people view you as not being very smart, that will affect how you feel about yourself. And he called this term the looking glass self. Looking glass is just another name for mirror. So the way our feelings about who we are depend largely on how we see ourselves evaluated by others. Your sense of self is based, at least in part, on your perception of how other people see you. And children begin to perceive how other people treat them. They develop an image or a picture of themselves consistent with how they feel they are treated or thought of by others. And over time, as a result of this, people develop a coherent concept of the self. Cooley said this involves 3 steps, and this is very, very simple. So the first thing that happens is you're imagining how you appear to the people around you. Teenagers are a great, clear example of this, wanting to fit in and for people to have positive evaluations of them. Another good example to demonstrate this is why some students do not raise their hand to ask a question in class, even if it's an important question for their understanding. They are imagining how they appear to people around them, and they don't want to risk appearing stupid to the people around them. The second step is that you interpret other people's reactions. Do they think I'm stupid for asking that question? Do they like me? Do I fit in for wearing that shirt? And then lastly, whatever that evaluation is, whatever that interpretation is, it's going to contribute a tiny, tiny little sliver to a person's sense of self. So this happens hundreds of thousands of times over the course of a person's lifetime. You develop feelings and ideas about yourself. A favorable reflection in this social mirror contributes to a positive sense of self, and a negative reflection in this social mirror contributes to a negative sense of self. So I'm going to give you an example. I want you to picture a girl going out on a Saturday night, and she knows at the bar she's going to, there's going to be somebody there, or the party she's going to, that she really likes, and so she wants to impress them. She might spend a lot of extra time on her hair, on her makeup, go through half the clothes in her closet, figuring out to wear, does her nails. And as she does this, she's in stage 1. She has an image of how she's going to look, of how she is going to appear to the people around her, especially the person she's interested in. She's imagining what they're going to think of her. Then she's at the bar or the party, and she sees the person she's trying to impress, and she's trying to play it cool. They say hi, barely acknowledge her, and continue walking on by. She's going to interpret what she thinks they think of her. And obviously, in this situation, she's going to have a negative interpretation. She feels this is a clear message they're not interested in her. She's interpreting the reaction. And this leads to stage 3. It contributes a tiny, minuscule little piece to herself, to her sense of self. Now, the thing is, the looking glass self is not always accurate. You may have a distorted perception. The looking glass process takes place in your own mind. And since it is the product of your own imagination or your own perception, it may be accurate. In other words, the looking glass may be distorted. You may not be accurately reading what other people think. And I think weight is the classic example of this. Somebody thinks they're much heavier than they are. They think that other people think that they need to lose weight, or they think that other people think they're not attractive, when that's not what other people think at all. So maybe the girl who is trying to impress somebody misinterpreted. Maybe this person was just as nervous as she was and didn't know what to say. Maybe they had a fight with their roommates, or they were really ticked off about something. Maybe they weren't paying attention to anything at all because they had so much in their mind. And it's not unusual for a teenager to think a friend of theirs is mad at them, for example, when they're really not. They misinterpret things. Now, what's important here is that even though people sometimes misinterpret what they think other people think of them, that misinterpretation almost doesn't matter. Even when we wrongly believe that someone dislikes us or is mad at us, the consequences of believing that are as real to us as if they actually did have that opinion. So even if incorrect, the looking glass self will still affect us. And we don't use everybody equally as a mirror. A supply teacher you see a couple times a year is not going to be as significant as your regular daily teacher. An aunt or uncle or a cousin that you see once a year at Christmas is not going to have as much effect on your sense of self as the aunt and uncle that lives in town, the same place you do. So you're not as equally influenced by all people. Some people are much more significant by others in terms of how they influence your sense of self.